I was never the daughter my father wanted. Even as a child, I could feel it, not in what he said, but in the long silences between the things he didn't. When my brother Ethan brought home a science trophy, Dad framed it on the wall. When I placed first in a writing competition, he glanced at the certificate and said, "Cute, but what are you going to do with that?" That became the theme of our relationship. He was a man of numbers, outcomes, strategy. I was the girl with too many books, too many questions, and never the right kind of ambition. At family reunions, I'd show up in sundresses while everyone else wore business casual. I'd talk about passion projects and startups while my cousins bragged about law school offers and internships in finance. And my dad? He never missed an opportunity to remind everyone I was still figuring things out. Danielle's taking the scenic route, he'd joke. Not everyone's built for the straight path. She's creative. He made creative sound like a diagnosis. I used to pretend it didn't bother me. I'd smile, refill the deviled eggs, laugh politely at the same tired story about Uncle Rick's third divorce. But inside, I was folding in on myself. I remember one year, the year I dropped out of my MBA program to pursue a tech startup. I walked into the reunion and overheard him whisper to a relative, "She's going through a phase. It'll pass. She'll come back home when it fails." I never said a word. I just hugged my grandmother and helped set up chairs like nothing happened. But it stayed with me, like a stone in my pocket, small, sharp, and always there. For years I let it shape me. I chose silence over confrontation. I built dreams in secret because I was scared to have them laughed at out loud. I didn't even tell him when my startup got accepted into an accelerator program in San Francisco, because I knew he'd say something like, "So what, they're letting anyone in these days?" When my app hit its first 10,000 users, I celebrated alone with a cheap bottle of wine and a chocolate bar from Walgreens. Because there was no one in my family I could call who would understand, or care. It wasn't just him. My uncle's aunts, cousins, they followed his lead. They saw me through the lens he created. Flaky, soft, too emotional to lead, too stubborn to conform. To them, I was the sweet one, the odd one, the girl who never quite got with the program. They never asked about my work, never invited me to networking dinners or passed along connections. At best, I was invisible. At worst, I was a punchline. Still, I kept showing up. Every year, like clockwork, I went to the reunion, brought potato salad, wore polite smiles, sat through conversations about Roth IRAs and real estate deals I couldn't contribute to. I thought if I kept showing up, maybe one day they'd see me. Maybe one day I'd walk into that house and someone would say, "That's Danielle. She's doing something remarkable." But that day never came. Not until the year everything changed. The year I walked in as the woman they disowned, and walked out as someone they couldn't ignore. They didn't know what I was building. To them, I was just drifting, playing around with apps and ideas, like a child rearranging doll furniture. They didn't see the 12-hour days, the overdraft notices, the rejection emails that could fill an entire folder titled, "Sorry, not a fit." But I kept going. My startup was born out of something I wish I had growing up, a platform that made real emotional health accessible. Not a meditation app with pretty waves and vague quotes. Something raw, real, responsive. Something that would listen. I called it Clarity. At the time, it was just me, two co-founders I met through an online startup forum, and an old MacBook with a battery that gave up after an hour. We worked in coffee shops, ate whatever was cheap, slept 4 hours a night, and pitched our product to anyone who'd listen. We had no funding, no office, no safety net. But we had a vision. Meanwhile, the rest of my family assumed I was either unemployed or wasting time. My dad told anyone who asked that I was doing freelance tech stuff. One time, I caught him saying she's playing with code. You know how these millennials are? That word playing got under my skin. Because what he called playing, I called survival. While he rolled his eyes at another wellness thing, I was designing AI-powered triage for real-time mental health intervention. While he bragged about Ethan's promotion in commercial real estate, I was signing a pilot partnership with a school district to help teens in crisis. But I never corrected him, because I didn't need his belief to build. 1 year into launch, Clarity had its first viral moment. A high-profile influencer posted a thread about how the app had helped her out of a panic spiral in the middle of the night. Downloads exploded. We hit 50,000 users in 48 hours. Suddenly, I was being invited to podcast interviews and investor panels. And my inbox. It changed overnight. The same VCs who ignored me now wanted a quick 15 minutes. The same mentors who said too early were now saying, how much do you need? We raised $2.3 million in our seed round. But you know what I did that night? I called my mom. I told her the news. She congratulated me in the way someone does when they don't fully understand, and then asked if I'd still be coming to the family reunion that summer. I said yes, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see if anything had changed. Spoiler, it hadn't. I arrived with a gift basket and a bottle of Pinot, wearing the same quiet smile I'd worn for years. They were talking about Ethan's latest investment property, about stocks, about how tech is oversaturated. And my dad? He nodded politely at me, introduced me to a colleague as Danielle, my daughter. She's into online things. Online things? I smiled, bit my tongue, and poured myself a glass of wine. Because sometimes power doesn't look like shouting your worth. Sometimes it looks like knowing it and watching them miss it entirely. But deep down, I wondered, how long would I keep swallowing my pride just to be tolerated? Was being invited enough? Or did I deserve to take up space without apology? I didn't know then. But I was about to find out. Because the next reunion would change everything. And this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. It was the same backyard, same folding tables, same paper lanterns hanging from the same oak trees. And yet everything about me had changed. Clarity had just closed its Series A. We were valued at $40 million. I had a team of 22 a suite in Tribeca, and a COO who used to work at Twitter. I was in meetings with senators about mental health legislation. And 3 days before the reunion, a Forbes article had called me the quiet storm in digital health. I should have walked in like I owned the place. But old habits don't die easy. I stood at the edge of the driveway for 5 full minutes before getting out of the car. 1 breath in. You belong. 1 breath out. They don't get to define you anymore. Inside, the music was the same, that weird blend of 80s pop and acoustic covers my aunt always cued on her Spotify. The food smelled like summer and corn oil. My cousins were already comparing mortgages and Tesla models. I was invisible. Again. They didn't ask about my life. No one brought up the article. It was as if the success I'd bled for didn't fit their version of me, so it simply didn't exist. So still doing your little project, one of my cousins asked, genuinely smiling, like it was meant as kindness. It's going well, I said, sipping lemonade that tasted like it resented being sugar-free. That's cute, she replied, then turned to ask someone else about IPOs. Then came the moment. My father stood up in front of everyone, clinking his wine glass with a spoon. Can I just say, he announced, smiling that perfect boardroom smile, how proud I am of this family. Of Ethan's promotion, of Maddie's engagement, and of everything we've built together. I smiled out of habit, but my heart sank at the words we've built together. He wasn't just skipping me, he was writing me out of the story. Then he added the dagger. And of course Danielle's here. Still exploring, what is it now, coaching, consulting laughter? Low polite cutting, like being stabbed with a butter knife. I felt every eye glance toward me, then away again. Dismissed. Again. Even after everything I'd built, they still saw a girl who hadn't settled down, hadn't made it real. I excused myself and walked out onto the porch, heart pounding, jaw clenched. I didn't cry, not this time. Instead, I looked at the backyard like it was a stage set I'd finally outgrown. Maybe I didn't need to fight for visibility here anymore. Maybe the battle was never mine to win. I stayed outside for a while, watching the sun lower behind the trees, and then the door creaked open behind me. Danielle Carter. I turned. It was a tall man in a blazer far too expensive for this setting. Clean-cut, charismatic, clearly out of place. Yes, I said. He smiled. I thought that was you. I've been trying to get on your calendar for months. Silence. The door swung fully open, and there standing behind him was my father, jaw slack, eyes wide, watching his boss introduce himself to the daughter he had just publicly dismissed. And in that moment, everything changed. I stood there, lemonade still in hand, while my father's boss smiled, like he'd just discovered buried treasure. You're the Danielle Carter behind Clarity, right? We just started pilot trials with your platform at 2 of our branches. The feedback's been incredible. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, even though my heartbeat was pounding in my ears. Behind him, the backyard went still. A hush swept through the crowd like someone had pressed mute. My dad, Raymond Carter, stood frozen, the same man who had just implied I was still figuring things out, now visibly trying to compute what was happening. His boss extended a hand. "I'm Edward Brooks, COO at Pendleton Medical Group. We've been following your work for a while now. What you're doing with AI-driven support and accessible crisis care, honestly, it's revolutionary." He turned briefly to look at my dad and said almost offhand, "You never mentioned Danielle was the Danielle Carter." Ouch! I glanced at my father. His mouth opened like he was about to say something, then closed again. I watched the reality settle in across his face, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't playing with code. This was power. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking. He was. More people started to gather. Whispers spread. Someone opened their phone and pulled up my Forbes article. Another person said, "Wait, that's her. I thought you were kidding." Edward turned to me again. "I'd love to schedule a meeting. Off the record, we've been considering a deeper partnership. I know you're busy, but I'd consider it a personal favor if you let me buy you lunch this week." I smiled, calm, poised, unshaken. "I'd be happy to." He handed me a card, the expensive kind, embossed and minimal. "Looking forward to it, Miss Carter." Miss Carter. That name used to feel small in this house, used to belong to someone who didn't know where she fit. Now it sounded like a brand. As he walked away, I turned back toward the porch where my dad still stood. His cheeks were flushed. His wineglass hung limp in one hand, forgotten. He opened his mouth again. "Danielle, I waited, but there was nothing. No apology, no pride, just shock and discomfort, like he'd been caught mislabeling his own child. So I saved him. Don't worry, Dad. It's hard to keep up with what your kids are doing these days." My tone was light but deliberate. A few people chuckled. Not cruelly, just knowingly. For the first time ever, they were laughing at him, not me. I stepped off the porch and walked through the yard past cousins, who now looked at me differently. Not like an outsider, not like an underachiever, but like a woman they suddenly wished they'd paid more attention to. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. Because real power doesn't beg to be seen. It simply walks in and gets recognized. He found me by the driveway as I was getting ready to leave. The sun was setting, casting gold across the cars, the lawn, the folding chairs now emptied of judgment. I'd already said my polite goodbyes. I didn't expect him to follow me, but of course he did. "Danielle?" He called a little breathless. I turned calm. His voice was softer now, almost unfamiliar. It didn't have that edge of superiority it used to carry when he'd talk about Ethan or politics or the stock market. He looked smaller, not physically, just diminished somehow, not in control of the room anymore. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms lightly. About what just happened. About everything." He shifted his weight. He didn't know where to start, because he'd never had to start a conversation like this with his daughter holding the power. "I had no idea," he said. "No," I replied. "You didn't want to." He winced. I didn't enjoy that. I didn't want to hurt him. But I also wasn't there to protect him from the consequences of his own blind spots. "Danielle, I was just trying to push you to be practical, to succeed. You know how hard the world can be. I didn't want you chasing pipe dreams. You didn't push me, Dad. You erased me. That landed." He blinked. "I'm not here to rub anything in," I continued. "But you don't get to take credit for something you spent years ignoring." "I'm not trying to take credit," he said quickly. I want to understand. Maybe even help." I almost laughed. "Now you want to help?" He didn't respond, so I filled the silence. "Is this because your boss recognized me? Because I built something you can't deny anymore? Or is it because suddenly I'm worth standing next to again?" His face twisted shame, regret, confusion. Maybe all of it. "Look, your work. It's impressive. Really, I mean that. And if there's anything I can do to support it, to maybe repair some things." "No, just that. One word, not cruel, not loud, just final." He froze. No, Dad. I'm not something you get to disown in private and then claim in public." I stepped closer. "You made me feel like I didn't belong, like I wasn't enough because I didn't fit your image of success. But now that I do, conveniently you want back in." He lowered his gaze. "It was never about love," I added. "It was about image. And that's not family. That's branding." We stood there in the thick of it, years of silence, of misunderstanding, of pretending finally unraveling. I don't need a father who only claps when there's an audience, I said. I needed one who saw me when no one else did. But I became that person for myself, and I'm not going to give you credit for a battle you never showed up to fight. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like someone realizing the door was closed, and this time it wasn't going to reopen just because he knocked. I got into my car, rolled down the window. I wish you well, Dad, truly, but I'm not going to shrink myself again so you can feel tall. And with that, I drove away. No dramatic music, no tears, just clarity. Because that's what happens when you stop begging for approval and start owning your truth. You don't burn bridges, you just stop walking back across them. It's been 8 months since the reunion, since my father tried to reclaim what he never really accepted. And life has never been quieter or clearer. My phone still buzzes with calls and deals and venture terms I once only dreamed of. But now they don't define me, they orbit me. I bought a place just outside the city, something with glass trees and silence. A home I filled with things I chose, not things I inherited, not furniture passed down with strings of expectation, just pieces of me stitched into space. I planted lavender outside the kitchen. I keep a mug on the windowsill that says I built this. Because I did. Not out of spite. Not even out of pain. But because I had to. Because no one else would. Sometimes people ask if my father and I ever reconciled. I tell them the truth. We had a moment of honesty, and then we moved on, separately. And I don't say it with bitterness, just grace. Because here's the thing about becoming yourself. You don't need everyone to come with you. Some people are chapters, not companions. And closure. It's not always a conversation. Sometimes it's a boundary. I still get emails from cousins. Hey, I read about your keynote. Saw your face on that billboard. My friend uses your app. She didn't even know we were related. That last one always makes me smile. Because she's right. We're not. Not in the ways that matter. I look back now and realize I wasn't rejected. I was redirected. Every "you're too much" was a clue that I was too much for them, not for this world. Every silence was space I later filled with voice. Every dismissal was an invitation to build my own seat. And every time I was called dramatic, idealistic, or hard to follow, I was quietly laying the bricks of something none of them would understand until it towered over them. I wasn't disowned. I outgrew them. Their values, their approval, their shrinking view of who I could become. And in that freedom, I found something no inheritance could ever buy: peace, pride, and the unshakable knowledge that I made it not because they let me, but because I finally stopped asking for permission. There was a time I used to lie awake wondering what it would feel like to be loved by my father. To have him look at me and say, "I'm proud of you," not as a reward, but as a reflex. That craving followed me for years. I dressed it up as ambition, painted it over with success, buried it beneath press mentions and revenue charts. But no matter how polished the surface, I was still that little girl scanning every room for his approval. Until I stopped. And when I stopped looking, I realized something profound. His love was never mine to earn. Because it was never unconditional to begin with. I started keeping a journal after the reunion. Not for the headlines, not for the milestones, just for the quiet things. Like the first time I signed a partnership without second-guessing myself. Like the night I sat on the floor of my new apartment eating noodles and laughing, not because something was funny, but because I finally felt light. Or the afternoon I passed by a father holding his daughter's hand in the park, and didn't feel jealous, just peaceful. Knowing that even if I hadn't received that kind of love, I had become the kind of person who could give it. A few months ago, I got an invitation, my mother's birthday. There was going to be a dinner, just family, the text said. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I was scared, but because I needed to ask myself a different question. Does this version of me belong in that room anymore? Not the girl who used to wait for scraps of affection, not the woman who had to prove her worth to breathe, but the Danielle who had learned that family isn't made of obligation, it's made of respect, reciprocity, and choice. I didn't go. Instead, I sent flowers, and a card that simply read, "Wishing you light. I hope you find peace too." And that was enough. I'm not angry anymore. Not at my father, not at my family, not even at the past. Because all of it, the wounds, the silence, the exile gave me, what no easy life ever could: clarity. Not just the name of my company, but the gift of finally seeing myself without the fog of someone else's disappointment. I don't need a legacy. I don't need their throne. I built my own castle out of every stone they threw. And now I open the door for others. So if you're reading this and you've ever been the outcast, the black sheep, the too much in a room full of just enough, let me say this to you plainly. You were never broken. You are just blooming in a place that tried to prune you. You are not the failure. You are the first to break free. And that is something no one can disown.